Is it smarter to be original or to copy something that already works? Can copying a billion-dollar brand actually be a winning strategy? What if being a copycat is the smartest move in business? Today, we're going to tell you a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about originality in business. Before Starbucks ever opened a single cafe in the United Kingdom, two Americans quietly built their own version of it. They didn't steal the brand, but they borrowed the blueprint. And within just a few years, they sold that copy to Starbucks themselves. What they built wasn't just a coffee chain, it was a placeholder for a global giant that hadn't arrived yet. This isn't a story about theft. It's a story about vision, timing, and the kind of strategic copying that changes everything. In the mid-1990s, London was transforming. The skyline bristled with cranes, foreign investment surged, and a new generation of professionals filled the streets with urgency and ambition. Yet, amid all this progress, there was something missing, something almost invisible unless you were looking for it. The cafes were stale, uninspired. Most offered nothing more than weak filter coffee, soggy sandwiches, and a handful of tired chairs. Tea still reigned, and coffee, where it appeared, was little more than a utilitarian beverage. There was no ritual, no culture, no community. London was a world capital without a coffee soul. Across the Atlantic, Seattle had already lived through its coffee revolution. Espresso bars weren't just shops, they were social hubs, creative spaces, extensions of people's living rooms. And at the center of it all was Starbucks, a company that had taken the Italian espresso tradition and molded it into something distinctly American, convenient, approachable, and aspirational. The couple settled into life in London, but something felt off. The rain was familiar, the pace was exhilarating, but when they looked for a good cup of coffee, they found almost nothing. The cafes were lifeless, the drinks were bland, the entire experience lacked the warmth, depth, and energy they had known back home. At first, it was just a personal frustration, but gradually, the void revealed itself for what it was: an open lane, a market left untouched, a city that didn't yet know what it was missing. Rather than wait for someone else to bring it, the Svensons made a decision. If the UK had no Starbucks, they would build its British counterpart. They studied what made coffee culture in Seattle thrive: the quality of the espresso, the efficiency of service, the welcoming atmosphere, the balance between sophistication and accessibility. And then they translated that model into a version that Londoners could adopt as their own. It would look familiar to an American, but fresh and progressive to a Brit. The name they chose was both honest and strategic: Seattle Coffee Company. The first store opened in 1995 on South Moulton Street, tucked between the shops of Oxford Street and the elegance of Mayfair. It was compact but carefully designed. Exposed wood, handwritten menu boards, soft lighting, and the unmistakable aroma of freshly ground beans. People stopped in, curious. The experience was unlike anything they had seen locally. Baristas moved with precision, espresso machines hissed and steamed, and customers walked out holding tall paper cups, a subtle, stylish symbol of modernity. For the first time, coffee in London wasn't just a drink. It was an experience. The shop became a magnet for a certain kind of customer: young professionals, tourists, creatives, and early adopters. They came for the coffee, but they stayed for the rhythm. And as word spread, so did the company. New locations followed rapidly. Each store replicated the same atmosphere, the same service standards, the same visual language. It wasn't franchised, it wasn't chaotic, it was intentional, scalable, and smart. By the late 1990s, Seattle Coffee Company had over 70 locations across the United Kingdom and had become the face of London's emerging cafe culture. But while the British public was discovering this new ritual, Starbucks was watching. The American giant had global ambitions and a strategy to expand into Europe. The groundwork had been laid, but rather than start from scratch, Starbucks saw an opportunity that aligned perfectly with its own identity. Seattle Coffee Company wasn't just inspired by Starbucks, it was Starbucks in all but name. Its branding, atmosphere, menu, and ethos were already aligned. All that remained was to bring the brand home. In 1998, Starbucks made its move. It acquired Seattle Coffee Company in full, absorbing its infrastructure, staff, and prime locations. Practically overnight, the imitation became the official presence. Store by store, Seattle Coffee Company was rebranded. The signs changed, the cups changed, but to most customers, little else shifted. What had begun as a borrowed idea now belonged to the very company that inspired it. And Scott and Ali Svensson, they walked away with a successful exit, having built, scaled, and sold the very thing their former city had made famous. This was not theft, it was strategy. A calculated replication of a proven model introduced into a market where it did not yet exist and executed with precision. The Svenssons didn't just copy a brand. They understood the essence of a culture, translated it, and sold it back to its originator. In doing so, they proved that invention isn't always the most powerful force in business. Sometimes, the real genius lies in recognizing what's missing and building it first. London in the 1990s was not a city asleep. It was alive, urgent, reinventing itself after decades of economic stagnation. Global finance poured through the city. Music, fashion, and art pulsed from neighborhoods like Camden and Soho. The post-Thatcher generation wanted more than tradition. They wanted speed, style, and identity. But while the streets evolved and the skyline shifted, one part of daily life remained surprisingly untouched: the way people consumed coffee. Coffee in Britain was an afterthought. At home, it came from jars of instant granules. In offices, it was watery, vending machine sludge. And in cafes, it was neither specialty nor service. It was functional at best, forgettable at worst. You could find a cappuccino, perhaps, but it bore little resemblance to the rich, crafted drinks being poured in Milan or Seattle. There were no third places, no lounge-friendly cafes. With playlists and pastries, no espresso bars that knew your name. Coffee was something you drank, not something you experienced. The cafe landscape reflected this indifference. High streets had greasy spoons, bakeries, and the occasional sandwich chain. But you couldn't find a place to sit with a laptop and a latte, or to people watch while sipping an Americano. The idea that a cafe could be aspirational, artistic, or central to one's routine simply didn't exist. And, most tellingly of all, there was no Starbucks, not a single location. The most iconic name in modern coffee culture had not yet planted a flag on British soil. This absence was more than a blind spot. It was an opening, a gap between what the market offered and what a new generation was ready to embrace. Young professionals were traveling, reading, tasting, comparing. London was cosmopolitan enough to desire more, but had not yet evolved enough to demand it. And so the gap sat there, unnoticed by most, until someone who had lived the other side of the story came along. Scott and Ali Svensson didn't invent coffee culture, but they had lived inside it. Coming from Seattle, they had watched an entire city transform around its cafes. They knew the rituals, the flavors, the role a cup of coffee could play in someone's day. And when they moved to London, what they noticed first wasn't what the city had, it was what it didn't. The gap revealed itself not in theory, but in small, frustrating moments. No espresso bar on the corner, no cozy cafe to stop in, no familiar rhythm to the day. And, like any true opportunity, it appeared as a problem. They didn't need to wonder whether Londoners were ready. They knew they were. The culture was already shifting. The infrastructure just hadn't caught up. What was missing wasn't desire, it was delivery. And in that delay between cultural readiness and commercial availability, the door stood wide open. Someone would eventually bring modern cafe culture to Britain. The only question was, who would get there first? Scott and Ali Svensson didn't arrive in London with a business plan. They came as ordinary expatriates, young, married, and far from home. Both had grown up in Seattle, a city already deep into its love affair with coffee. In Seattle, cafes weren't just places to buy a drink. They were part of the city's rhythm. Slow mornings with a cappuccino, afternoons warmed by conversation, evenings softened by soft jazz and the scent of espresso. It was a lifestyle, not a transaction. In London, the absence of that culture was immediately felt. For the Svensons, what was missing wasn't just a beverage, it was a kind of emotional infrastructure. There were no places that invited you to linger, no baristas who knew your name, no third spaces between work and home. The ritual, the warmth, the quiet invitation to slow down, it was all gone. London was vibrant, but its cafe culture hadn't caught up. Scott had a background in investment banking, and Ali had studied nutrition and marketing. On paper, neither were seasoned entrepreneurs, but they shared a clarity of vision and the instincts of consumers who knew what they wanted. And more importantly, they recognized the difference between a passing frustration and a market-wide void. Their yearning for Seattle-style cafes wasn't nostalgia. It was a preview of what a modern London could want, if someone was bold enough to deliver it. What began as a personal craving turned into a strategic insight. They looked around and saw no competitors, no imitators, no serious players occupying the space Starbucks had mastered back home. The idea was deceptively simple. If London didn't have that kind of cafe, then someone should build it, not reinvent it, just transplant it. The model already existed, the brand philosophy, the customer experience, even the flavor profile. It had all been proven. What was needed now was execution. The Svensons weren't trying to outdo Starbucks. They were bringing it to life in a new geography. But instead of licensing the brand or waiting for the American giant to expand overseas, they built their own. A new company with its own name and British roots, but unmistakably inspired by Seattle. Their business would not be a tribute. It would be a mirror. Familiar but local. Proven but new. It was a calculated act of strategic imitation, and it was bold. They were entering a country with no cafe culture to lean on, introducing a foreign model to a traditional market, and doing so without the backing of a global corporation. But the timing was right. London was changing, consumers were evolving, and the idea they brought with them of a cafe as community, comfort, and quality was about to meet its moment. The Svensons began by dissecting the essence of Seattle's coffee culture, searching for the core elements that made it resonate so deeply with its community. It wasn't just about the coffee itself, but the experience surrounding it. At its heart lay the quality of the espresso drinks, carefully crafted, rich, and consistent. The machines hissed and steamed, while baristas pulled shots with precision and pride. It was a level of care that London's coffee scene sorely lacked. Equally important was the way customers were treated. Service was not a formality but a friendly exchange. Baristas greeted regulars by name, remembered their usual orders, and fostered a sense of belonging. This accessibility transformed a simple coffee run into a small ritual of connection. It was informal, yet intentional, professional, yet personal. A balance the Svensons knew would appeal to Londoners hungry for community. The physical spaces where coffee was consumed were another crucial factor. Seattle cafes embraced modern, inviting interiors, spaces designed for both brief stops and longer stays. Warm wood tones, comfortable seating, ambient lighting, and open layouts encouraged customers to settle in or move on as their day demanded. These cafes felt less like transactional shops and more like extensions of home or work, welcoming and adaptable. Finally, the convenience of fast takeaway options was a subtle but vital part of the formula. Urban professionals moved quickly, juggling meetings and errands, providing coffee in portable cups, served swiftly without sacrificing quality, met this need perfectly. The takeaway culture hadn't yet taken hold in the UK, but the Svensons recognized it as an essential ingredient for modern coffee culture. With these insights, the Svensons set out to recreate the Seattle coffee experience on British soil. They chose the name Seattle Coffee Company, a brand that evoked authenticity and trust, without attempting to masquerade as the original Starbucks. It was a nod to their roots, a signal of quality, and a declaration of intent. More than a name, it was a promise to bring something genuine to a market that lacked it. The company was both familiar and fresh, American in spirit, yet tailored for London's sensibilities. Seattle Coffee Company filled a cultural and commercial void. It introduced British consumers to a coffee culture that was not only new, but deeply needed. Seattle Coffee Company's journey began humbly, with a single small shop tucked away just off Oxford Street. The location was unassuming, yet deliberate, close enough to the city's bustling heart to attract curious passers-by, yet discreet enough to cultivate a sense of discovery. Inside, the atmosphere was carefully curated, warm wood, gentle lighting, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. It was a quiet invitation to experience something new. But what started as a modest experiment soon ignited something much larger. The Svensons weren't merely opening a coffee shop, they were planting the seeds of a cultural transformation. Word spread quickly, office workers seeking an escape from their routines, students searching for a place to study, and visitors eager for authentic experiences all found themselves drawn into the fold. The concept resonated, the demand soared. Fueled by this growing enthusiasm, Seattle Coffee Company expanded rapidly. New stores sprang up across London and beyond, each replicating the signature blend of quality, service, and ambiance. Expansion was methodical, yet ambitious, never sacrificing the brand's carefully crafted identity. In just a few years, what began as a solitary storefront blossomed into a network of over 70 cafes spanning Britain's urban centers. This growth wasn't accidental. It was the result of strategic insight and execution. The Svensons knew they were not competing with an established player in the UK market. Starbucks had no footprint on this side of the Atlantic, leaving a clear path ahead. Their early entry gave them a critical advantage, allowing Seattle Coffee Company to become synonymous with modern coffee culture in Britain before the global giant arrived. They weren't just filling a gap, they were defining it. Their success was not measured solely in the number of stores, but in the creation of a movement that reshaped how a nation experienced coffee. By the time Starbucks made its move, the Svensons had already secured a position no newcomer could easily dislodge. By 1998, Starbucks was poised to take the next step in its global expansion. Europe was the next frontier, rich with potential, but marked by established traditions and cautious consumers. The company could have chosen to build its presence slowly and deliberately, starting from scratch, opening stores one by one, testing markets, learning as it went. But Starbucks did not take that path. Instead, the American giant made a decisive move. It identified a ready-made network of cafes, already embodying its ethos and serving its target market. That network was the Seattle Coffee Company. Starbucks acquired the entire brand, along with its infrastructure, staff, and loyal customer base, in one seamless transaction. The deal was more than a business purchase. It was a strategic shortcut. Almost overnight, the familiar signs of Seattle Coffee Company began to be replaced by the iconic Green Mermaid. The company that had been a bold imitation transformed into the authentic expression of the Starbucks brand. For customers, the transition was smooth and almost imperceptible. The quality, service, and atmosphere remained constant, but now carried the weight of a global powerhouse. For Scott and Ali Svensson, the acquisition was the culmination of years of vision and hard work. They had not only introduced modern coffee culture to the UK, but had built a thriving enterprise worthy of acquisition. Their successful exit was a testament to their strategic foresight and execution. They had entered a market ahead of a giant and emerged as its gateway. Starbucks, in turn, gained an invaluable advantage. By buying an established presence rather than building a new, it leapfrogged initial barriers and accelerated its European launch. The acquisition allowed Starbucks to claim a dominant position in the UK's coffee market from the outset, leveraging the groundwork laid by the Svensons. This chapter of the story underscored a powerful lesson in business strategy. Sometimes, the fastest way forward is to acquire what already works, rather than reinventing the wheel. After the successful sale of Seattle Coffee Company to Starbucks, Scott and Allie Svensson returned to the United States with more than just financial gain. Their experience had sharpened their business instincts and deepened their understanding of what drives cultural change in food and beverage. The couple had evolved from entrepreneurs into visionary pattern seekers, able to identify emerging trends and unmet desires before the wider market caught on. Back on American soil, the Svenssons turned their attention to a different culinary canvas: pizza. It was a universally loved staple, yet much like coffee had been in London years earlier, pizza service in many places felt outdated, slow, impersonal, and lacking innovation. They saw an opportunity to apply the same principles that had fueled their coffee venture: quality, speed, customization, and community. Their vision for mod pizza took clear cues from the success of Subway, a pioneer in fast, personalized food. Subway had transformed the sandwich market by offering customers the power to customize their meals quickly, blending efficiency with individual choice. The Svenssons recognized this as a winning formula, adaptable to pizza, a food traditionally slow to prepare and often served in rigid, preset ways. In 2008, they co-founded Mod Pizza in Seattle, a fast casual pizza chain built on the core idea of personalization. Customers could craft their own pizzas with endless combinations, baked swiftly in high-temperature ovens. This model combined Subway's ethos of customization and speed with a commitment to quality ingredients and a welcoming environment that fostered community. Mod Pizza quickly gained momentum. It tapped into evolving consumer preferences for transparency, personalization, and social responsibility. The brand cultivated a culture that valued its employees and customers alike, reinforcing a sense of belonging reminiscent of the warmth and connection the Svenssons had nurtured years before in their coffee shops. Their approach was not simply about food, it was about creating spaces where people could gather, express themselves, and feel part of something bigger. Their journey from coffee to pizza revealed a consistent talent, the ability to recognize cultural shifts early, and build businesses that harnessed those changes with authenticity and speed. They had mastered the art of translating ideas into tangible experiences, transforming ordinary moments, whether sipping coffee or sharing a meal, into something memorable and meaningful. This chapter in the Svenssons story underscored a timeless truth in entrepreneurship. Success is less about inventing something completely new and more about seeing patterns others miss, moving decisively, and crafting experiences that resonate deeply with people's evolving lives. Now that you've heard the story of the Svenssons and how strategic copying helped them build a thriving business and even sell it to the original giant, what do you think? Are there other industries or business ideas that you believe are ripe for copying and improvement? Where do you see opportunities today for smart entrepreneurs to spot a gap and build something new by learning from what already works? Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments below. I'd love to hear what business you think is next for this kind of smart innovation. Thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, you must be enjoying the content. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. This is Liam, and I'll see you next time.